And we are live. A very warm welcome to another edition of the Smart Money Podcast. I'm your host, David Claxton. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by my guest today, Stephen Scragg. Stephen is a journalist, a senior writer at the Football Times. He also writes for This Is Anfield and has also contributed to The Guardian and The Athletic. He's also an author of two football-focused books, one on the Cup Winners' Cup and the other on the UEFA Cup. Stephen, how are you doing today? Great to have you on.
Oh, thanks for the invite. Yeah, looking forward to chatting all sorts of Cup Winners' Cup related and other topics as well.
For sure. It's probably actually one of my favourite tournaments, so we'll jump into that a bit later. But if you're tuning in today, we're live on Facebook, Twitter and YouTube. And be sure to give State of Mind's YouTube channel a subscription. We're currently at over 11,000 subscribers. Content is being added daily, so I'm sure you'll find something you like. So in terms of today's show, we are going to look at the continued fallout from the European Super League, which just doesn't seem to stop. We're then going to discuss Kevin De Bruyne negotiating his own contract at Man City and what that might mean for agents moving forward. And then, as mentioned, Stephen's book on the Cup Winners' Cup, we're going to look in detail into that. And then we're going to see if there's any parallels with UEFA's new European tournament called the Conference League. So jumping into our first topic today, the European Super League. It's unbelievable to think that it's only just over 4 weeks since this all kicked off and then was dead within a couple of days. Stephen, a month later, water under the bridge, as they say. Has your own opinion changed at all from the initial proposals? Or are you still kind of where you're at with your opinion on the European Super League?
I don't think I've changed my point of view on it. But within that, I'm kind of against both sides, really. The greed of the 12 clubs involved in the proposed Super League was never going to be an appetizing thing. But at the same time, the status quo of what UEFA have, manufactured or jockeyed football, the position they've jockeyed football into is not all appetizing either.
Definitely. And I think if we look at, what has happened from the initial kind of launch and then the abortive kind of end of it, we basically have two kind of groups of clubs. There's one group of clubs, which is the 9 clubs who basically gave up the ghost within a couple of days. And they have basically agreed to financial penalties worth 13 million, a combined 13 million pounds. And UEFA is calling it a goodwill contribution to benefit children's game and the grassroots game across Europe. In addition, they have agreed to a 5% cut of their competition revenue from UEFA's competitions for one season. Is that enough, really? Is that really a stiff financial penalty?
It's not going to make an impact at all on the financial stability of these clubs. And, all they'll be doing is waiting for, the next big story to come along that just makes everyone forget about what has happened. It's always quite sleight of hand. Look what I'm doing with the left hand while something's happening with the right. And, no, it's no huge epiphany as far as the clubs being sanctioned is concerned. The only major benefit, I think, apart from the fact that, some money goes towards, children's football schemes, that's always going to be a great thing. It's the greater involvement of supporters with the clubs, or at least, the improvement of communication strands at the very, very least.
And it's interesting you say that. Obviously, Chelsea and Spurs in the last month, in the wake of this ESL controversy, announced that they would have fans on the board moving forward. Do you think it's just a SOP, a PR play? Do they really actively want to engage with their fans?
No, they'll be wanting to make all the right noises. At the end, I think it'll always come down to a case of self-interest. If they can get away with not doing certain things, they will. But to a degree, there's certain degrees of lip service as part of it. It might be a cynical way of thinking about it, but it's just the way that big conglomerates, operate, whether that's a football club, whether that's a government, whether that's, multinational corporations. It is very much what's in it for us and what can we do here. At the same time, they will want to look impressive to their customers, because that's what we've all become. We're not necessarily football supporters anymore. We are customers. And, it is all about making the right noises. Football clubs have kind of become politicians in that respect.
And it's interesting you say that. I think if you look at even the Chelsea and the Spurs moves to bring fans onto the board, the main Spurs supporters group kind of pushed back against it and basically echoed your point. So I don't think the fans are fooled by this either. I think they're going into it with their eyes wide open. Will it actually maybe prevent a kind of two-footed plunge into another Super League? I'm not so sure. I think their voices will be quite small when compared with the financial realities of what these clubs are facing. And if we again look at those 9 clubs, the kind of clubs who all kind of threw in the towel quite quickly, they've also made a commitment to UEFA and its competitions. And within that, there's a financial penalty of 86 million for each club if they were to join an unauthorized competition in the future. Now, my own kind of thinking on this was, say you're Arsenal, no hope of probably winning the tournament, maybe an FA Cup, you never know in the next couple of seasons. Could you stockpile a war chest over maybe 2 or 3 seasons, pay the fine and join a Super League? Do you think that's a realistic kind of approach that some of these clubs might take?
It's certainly not a deterrent. That's one decent, maybe your best player for some clubs, maybe not even that for others. It's one or 2 sales of players to be able to drum up that type of money. I mean, if a new league was to come along and then say there's a security bond of £300 million, then what's the difference in siphoning less than a third of that off to pay the fine for actually taking part in it? The worry for me will be at some point the clubs will enter some kind of game of brinksmanship where they eventually try to paint UEFA as the villains of the piece, and it's UEFA that have forced us into this. That's what it's going to end up coming to be if a new league does eventually take place. For me, I think it will be revisited at some point or another. They'll come at it from a different direction. But, what went on 4 weeks ago is only history repeating itself. From an English league perspective, the big 5, as was in the 1980s, of Liverpool, Everton, Manchester United, Arsenal and Tottenham, there was talk of an English Super League, of them breaking away and inviting a certain amount of teams to join in. ITV were well on board for taking part in that as being the broadcasting arm. So, these are all, a case of history repeating. Football has this amazing habit every 20 to 30 years of throwing up some kind of attempt to shift the shape, to change the landscape. And that's been from the formation of the FA through the advent of the Football League, different divisions added, the abolition of the maximum wage, television's influence on football. The 1980s brought you the attempted Super League, then eventually the implementation of the Premier League, the rejigging of the European Cup to become the Champions League. And here we are 30 years on now from that last seismic change of Premier League and Champions League to what they're becoming now. So there will always be this periodical thirst for change, because push comes to shove, the biggest clubs will never, ever get over that fact that it's the thought from their perspective is that they are the biggest pull. They are the ones that bring in the big money for everyone else as well. And they'll always feel like they are the victims in a way. When right-minded people obviously believe that they're not. I don't believe they are. They're part of a collective, but they don't see that. And there'll be a new generation of owner that comes along, different directors, and it will be revisited in some manner at some point, whether that's sooner or later.
And the roll call you kind of give there of all these kind of historical kind of points in time, as you said, nearly every 10 years to like 20 years, this seems to rear its head. What do you see? Like, based on that knowledge that you kind of shared, like, what do you see being realistic? Is a Super League actually going to happen in your opinion?
I think it will in one form or another, whether that's under the umbrella of UEFA or a new entity or the clubs themselves. The Super League was designed to be, powered by the clubs themselves and having more autonomy as part of that. I think UEFA will eventually look at this and look at some of the elements of what was suggested and actually say, some of the structural ideas weren't all that bad. You look at the Champions League now, and I know as a Liverpool supporter, I watch my own team, and I don't think I can watch any of the other group games because it's a dull concept. There's no great interest in it. So when the Super League was put forward, one of the big things that they said was that we understand that the group stage is a bit of a turn-off. So they proposed this new format of 2 10-team divisions and the top 4 going through to knockout stages. In a way, that actually sounds quite an appealing format, really, in many ways. I think the Champions League, UEFA will eventually look at it and say, well, they were suggesting 2 leagues of 10. We have 32 teams in our Champions League. We could easily do 3 leagues of 10 and just drop 2 teams. You look at the South American qualifiers for the World Cup. So many times when we always discuss things like this, we'll turn around and say, what's really one of the best things in football is the South American World Cup qualifiers, a 10-team league of which they all just fight it out against themselves, and the top 4 go to the World Cup, and the 5th place team plays off. I actually think a format like that would actually look pretty good in Europe. I think if you had 3 leagues under UEFA, the top 2 maybe qualifying for the next stage automatically, and the best 2 third-place teams to join them. Suddenly it's an interesting looking concept. So I think that some lessons will be learned, some notes will have been taken, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if UEFA had eventually took on some of the ideas that the Super League was meant to be, not the financial aspect of it and the fact that, it will be a monopoly of 12 teams never relegated. I think they'd have to do it as is, you qualify via your league, you earn your place in the competition. But at the same time, they desperately need to do something to make the Champions League more interesting.
I'd agree with you. I think the real sticking point with the whole initial concept for the Super League was the fact there was no relegation. These teams were kind of handpicked, and football is not the NFL. It's not the NBA. No team has a right to be in the top competition every season. And I think that's where the main
it's the cocooning of clubs off and protecting them. That's not football. Football has always been about any club being able to climb that ladder. As unrealistic as it might be for some clubs, is that the top of the mountain is accessible. If you take that away from certain clubs, then what's the point?
Definitely. And I think something you raised earlier about kind of painting UEFA as the villain of the piece. That's nearly already going on with this kind of European Super League. As mentioned, we have the one group of kind of 9 teams who've kind of accepted their medicine, even if it's not that much. It's not too bad. And then you have 3 clubs who are in effect holdouts: Real Madrid, Barcelona, and Juventus. And obviously, the 2 kind of chief architects of this entire project were Agnelli at Juventus and Perez at Real Madrid. UEFA has announced that they're launching an investigation into these 3 teams. It's quite stunning that these teams are still holding out. Do you think it's going to come push to shove where they'll just have to accept what UEFA finds or UEFA kind of hits them with? Or do you think, one of the potential issues is that Juventus could be expelled from Serie A? Could we see a season next year, Serie A, where Juventus aren't actually even playing domestic football?
I think it'll come to a biting point at some stage, because Serie A have to step in there and say, well, look, where is the line that you draw where, Juventus are bringing the league into disrepute? It's one thing, one club, damaging their own self-interests and their position and the image, but to bring a whole league down, it would be another thing. It's not going to cease to exist, but Serie A is in a precarious position, really, because it's lost so much ground on the Premier League and the La Liga, even the Bundesliga to an extent. We're now 11 years since the last Serie A team won the Champions League. It's sad for me as being a huge fan of Italian football, certainly historically, to see it in disrepute, because this was the league that it was the highest plateau of any era of football, across the board. The Serie A of the 1980s and the 1990s was just way and above anything else that football's ever had. It was the place where Maradona played his football. Zico ended up there eventually, but it's where Platini was. It's where the gods of the game went. And if you were a serious player, that's where you wanted to go and test yourself and enjoy the rewards. And it was a wonderful, wonderful thing. And the way it's decayed as such is such a sad thing for me. So yeah, eventually the league itself. I mean, they've shown in the past that they're not afraid of sanctioning the biggest clubs. Calciopoli, Juventus were meant to go down to Serie C. They eventually, went to B. So, they do have a history of sanctioning the clubs, and if it needs to come to it, I'm sure they'll not be shy of doing it. But it will be interesting to see exactly what they do, what these sanctions will be, because this is a different era in which money talks. No matter that this concept of stopping the Super League is to try and silence money. You can't, because money is just it's been prevalent for so long. It's endemic in the sport, and it will always come down. It will always boil down to the cash. Serie A, relegate the most successful club, then that knock-on effect is that it damages their own TV rights, and at a time when they can't afford to do that.
Yeah, definitely. I was actually going to mention that about the TV rights. It really devalues them if they get rid of Juventus. So it's definitely the nuclear option, and I'd agree with you. I can't see them taking that drastic action given the domestic ramifications. And the other thing you mentioned about the Italian game is completely true. And one thing that's often overlooked is the infrastructure for the game in Italy. The stadiums are in an awful shape for the vast majority of teams there. Because of the system they have. Most clubs work in partnership with the local councils to build these stadiums. And teams like Fiorentina are playing in a stadium from the 30s. And there's still, these kind of long-winded projects that for a new stadium outside Florence is still not even really taken off. I suppose you obviously have a very interesting perspective on this European Super League. You're, as you mentioned, a Liverpool fan, and you've been a season ticket holder for over 20 years, and you were also in Istanbul, which is an amazing thing to kind of witness live. Absolutely incredible. How did you feel about Liverpool's involvement in as a Liverpool fanatic?
Yeah, unhappy about it. You can't be pleased about that. But what am I now? 47 almost. You become battle weary of it. And especially when you're looking at it from kind of like decades perspective of having seen, history repeat itself, and everything that is happening now is just a product of what has gone before. It's the offspring of the greed of 20 and 30 years ago. And my club is involved in that. So I'm never going to be pleased about that. But the great thing about Liverpool supporters is that they will rebel against what they see as being the wrong decision. Spirit of Shankly is wonderful. They do some amazing work, and it only came out yesterday about the four stipulations that they put to FSG look like they're going to largely be met. Which again, diplomacy can go a long way, and there is, I don't know, a very intelligent and articulate streak through Liverpool's most pre-active fans.
And what did you think of Klopp not even knowing about the proposals itself? Were you surprised by that?
No, again, I think I've reached a point where very little will surprise me in football, whether that's my own club or across the board. Jurgen Klopp's a wonderful, wonderful character. We've been blessed to have him, absolutely blessed to have him. And at the crux of everything, he's a football fanatic, and he has that inner child when it comes to football that so many of us have, and that's why he kind of speaks to us, because for us as the supporters, it comes down to the round ball and what you can do with it. It's not about the balances and the deficits and the money on the bottom line. It's always going to be about putting that ball in the back of the net and the sheer joy of it. And the way he reacts on the touchline, the way he embraces the game, it is just that basic, stripped back joy of it. So, his disappointment was, he's never going to be a great poker player, Jurgen Klopp. He wears his heart on his sleeve, and you can always tell exactly where he's coming from. So, he kind of lived it out for us in a way that, so many of us didn't really have to in that respect, because he spoke for us. It's rare that you get that concept of a manager and a support base being so in tune with each other. And we've been lucky enough down the years to have a few managers like that. But Klopp is exceptional at reading the room.
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting kind of aspect of this. Not informing the manager, and then the manager having to come out and nearly kind of explain it. Even Guardiola at the money bags, Man City having to come out. It's extremely interesting. I think this one will definitely rumble on, and we'll see what happens, particularly to the three kind of holdout clubs and what UEFA might levy on them. Moving on to our second topic today, Kevin De Bruyne, the kind of superstar player from Man City, he recently signed a new deal with the club, and he actually negotiated his own contract. Did you see this story? Were you interested about players potentially not using agents and negotiating for themselves?
Oh, I think it's great. I think it's a blast back from the past, because back in when I was a kid watching the game, in my teenage years back in the 80s, agents were only just really coming to the fore. There were a few around, but there were many players that took on their own discussions and negotiations for contracts. So it's like the wheel has gone full circle in that respect. So to see a high profile, such a high profile player such as Kevin De Bruyne enter into this, concept of striking his own deal, it's a great thing. I think there's too much, that it's so difficult now for so many players to be able to, I don't know, because they've been cocooned from such a young age, going through academy systems. Those at the very top, they have no idea of the concept of real life, and everything has been done for them. They're almost laminated sports stars. So to have someone to come forward and have that basic intelligence to be able to say, no, I can do this and do it himself. Not necessarily himself. He's had a little bit of help back there, but to lead it himself, I think it's a wonderful, and it will work as a I don't know, facilitator for other players to do so.
I think you're right. Players, particularly coming in at academy level, are nearly socialized. It's nearly like ticking a box, getting an agent.
It becomes the normalization. It's as much as picking your boots. It's picking your agent. It is all of those connotations that, if you've got a player that's been signed at the age of 6. I mean, I was talking not so long ago to Paul Power, who was on the backroom staff at Manchester City, former captain, had a wonderful playing career, and he was on about kind of like a 4-year-old being spotted by Manchester City. And this is just incredible. If you're talking about young children that are only not even kind of like primary school age in that respect, if they are brought in, and then, normally with those situations as well, if you're talking about a player that's been, or a child that's been uprooted from one community down at one end of the country or from another country, then they are going to be heavily looked after and never be in a position to kind of like fight for their own corner as such. And I'm sure there's a lot of players out there that wouldn't want to. They would be more than happy just to allow their agents to do it. They would see it as more trouble than it's worth to be able to have to go out and take that responsibility on. But definitely. I think it's a refreshing thing to see De Bruyne step up, and to have such a high profile player to do that as well will be a big preemptive for other players, hopefully.
Yeah, and if we kind of look a bit in detail about De Bruyne's case in particular, so he signed a 4-year contract. It's various media reports said that it's about 385,000 to 400,000 a week. He was previously on 300,000. So his own negotiations got him a raise, first of all. It went on for months. And the negotiations were led by himself, his father, and a lawyer in Belgium. The real interesting part within this is that he actually commissioned data analysts, a company called Analytics FC, to assess his influence at City. And this kind of data looked at past, present, and projected future performances, as well as his importance to the overall team structure. And basically, the conclusion in all this study was he was, quote, significantly underpaid. Do you think, regardless of the agent's kind of role, do you think more players might bring in these analytics kind of companies to nearly make their case for them as well? Maybe, the game tape doesn't say everything, but the analytics tells a bit more of the story. Do you think that will also be a kind of trend as well?
Oh, I'm sure. And any tool that can be used to, accentuate a player's ability or the importance of that player will be picked up and run with, by absolutely any player out there. I think it'll be something that will be very attractive and alluring towards agent-led players. Anything that bigs them up, anything that kind of like accentuates their importance will be, just such a valuable thing. And I can't see it being anything other than something that will certainly flood into football.
And what's, again, another really interesting point is he actually rejected City's initial offer in January 2021, which again, like he backed himself in this kind of high negotiation kind of stakes situation, which again says a lot about the guy as well. I suppose the one question I have, say, about the stats issue, say Analytics FC and these type of companies, can they really accurately tell how a player, particularly De Bruyne, the age he is, like their future performances are going to be? Is that a bit of hoodooism, or voodooism type thing? Is it really based on fact? Can we really assess it fairly?
No, because you can't possibly weigh in, mental health as part of that. As far as a player is concerned, yeah. You can never weigh in the situation when it comes to injuries. No one would have predicted Virgil van Dijk being written off for so much of this season. Yeah. There are far more variables to football than simply basis of where they, the parts of a pitch that they most frequent, how many times that they will play ball into a certain area. All of that. I'm not downplaying the importance of it, but I think it needs to be a balanced thing to get a truer reflection.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think particularly future performance, as you mentioned, football is such a variable game.
Yeah, there's too many variables. I mean, that's you're predicting the future of a player that will be playing under a different manager within a few years.
Exactly,
and
yeah.
There are so many variables, and that's the great thing about football is that it's the imponderables as well. So much you cannot predict.
And going back to the agent's role in all this, EPL teams paid over 260 million to agents in 2019-2020 season. Kind of looking at this, do you think agents will now say we might have to work a bit harder here? We might have to bring these analytics guys in with us, maybe reduce our fees. Is that realistic? Because obviously other players will be looking at what De Bruyne has done. He saved loads of money as well. And he's effectively cut out the middleman. So really agents will need to theoretically change the way they operate to survive.
In some respects, yes. But, I think, as I said earlier, I think there's probably a sizable section of the football playing community that wouldn't want the hard work. Basically, it's a bit like paying for someone to come in and do the decorating. Either do it yourself or you pay someone else to come in and do it. So it depends. Everyone is differently minded. There will be. What I wouldn't be surprised about is to see it escalate in a certain age demographic. You might find players that are coming towards the tail end of their careers, or they might think this is the last big contract, and I want as much out of this as possible. So it wouldn't surprise me if there's a certain age demographic that there is a marked increase in. But I'd be more than surprised if players below the age of 25, there's many that will take up the baton to discuss their own contracts, and they'll just think it's hard work, and there's other things they want to be doing instead.
I think you're right. I think at that age, I don't think I would have been, even in terms of my own career, be thinking about that type of thing, too focused on it. So I think footballers are very much like ourselves. But it'll definitely be interesting to see what happens. And I think De Bruyne is really kind of trailblazing with this. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. So moving on to our next topic, this is the kind of crux of today's show. So UEFA are obviously launching a new European tournament called the Conference League next season. And in my mind, it's perfect. It's a perfect time to then look back on UEFA's previous kind of third European tournament, the Cup Winners' Cup. And you've written a fantastic book called A Tournament Frozen in Time, The Wonderful Randomness of the European Cup Winners' Cup. It was a fantastic tournament. So I suppose to anyone tuning in today, can you just give a bit of background on what the Cup Winners' Cup was, how it operated, etc.?
Yes, it was just a very simple tournament. You won your domestic cup competition, you gained entry to the following season's European Cup Winners' Cup. Same as the European Cup, win your league title into the following season, you go into the European Cup. And all the teams that had not really succeeded as such, but have been thereabouts, would go off into the UEFA Cup. It was a very simple format, and yes, the Cup Winners' Cup, was kind of born because of the success of the European Cup. The European Cup had proved a huge success very, very quickly. UEFA, realised the potential of running a second competition, and the domestic cup winners was quite obviously, for them, the obvious route to go to.
And even when it kind of first started, the first one was held in 1960-61 season. There was a bit of skepticism at first, I think it's fair to say. A lot of nations didn't actually even have cup competitions, which is crazy to think about the volume of cup, domestic cup competitions, particularly in England. And there was only 10 teams in the initial Cup Winners' Cup. Fiorentina actually beat Glasgow Rangers. However, by 1968, all UEFA members had these domestic cup competitions in place, and the tournament was really up and running. Do you have any insight as to maybe how it kind of took off? Was it just that, as you said, based off that European Cup success, this second kind of competition really gained traction?
Yeah, it was literally as simple as that. The European Cup, again, a bit like the Cup Winners' Cup was, there was skepticism in some quarters. Chelsea were talked out of taking part in that first playing of the European Cup in 1955-56. Have regretted it ever since. But soon enough, the powers that be had changed the tune. That first Cup Winners' Cup played out by only 10 teams. To the trophy, even the trophy being handed out was one that never got handed out again. It wasn't the shape that the Cup Winners' Cup would become so familiar for being. Only 6 of the 10 teams had won their domestic cup the previous season. Many didn't have a domestic cup competition. So yes, this competition was simply a sibling to the European Cup, and the fact that within the first 5 years it had become blatantly obvious to UEFA that they'd created a monster with the European Cup, and they wanted a second one to go alongside it.
And it kind of shows the prominence as well of this kind of tournament. From 72 onwards, the UEFA Super Cup was contested by the Cup Winner Cup winners and the European Cup winners as well, which went on for a number of years. I suppose you wrote this fantastic book, kind of detailing the ins and outs of the tournament itself. What do you think the overall legacy of the Cup Winners' Cup is in your mind?
The legacy of it is that it was a tournament that was very much of its era. I would also say that it is responsible for the healthy nature of many of domestic cup competitions across Europe. You look at only a couple of seasons ago in how the response was on the streets of Valencia for their side winning the Copa del Rey. The scenes were incredible. They were wonderful to see, and this from a country that has always been. It's been suggested that the cup competition didn't really mean all that much over there. I think the fact that today that there are some domestic cup competitions across Europe out there that thrive is pretty much down. That's probably its lasting legacy. The book suggests it's a tournament frozen in time. It cannot be resurrected because it's of its time, and maybe that's for the best. I would hate them to bring it back and it to be a pale shadow of its former self. But yes, I think it has many sides of it that left some positive aspects. It is a success that means so much to the supporters of the teams that won it, the players involved. We'll never forget that. And this was a tournament as well that it was a huge tournament. You can't undersell just how big of a tournament it was. The 3 European tournaments as was. There was a defined, yes, the European Cup was the biggest of the 3, but the steps back to the Cup Winners' Cup and the UEFA Cup were only shallow steps. There was still a huge amount of kudos to winning both of the other 2 tournaments, which isn't reflected now in the way that the Europa League is viewed. Certainly from a UK perspective, anyway. There's a defined, uptown and downtown feel to Champions League and Europa League. The fact that it's seen as a bit of an afterthought when you've got kind of, mid-ranging clubs qualifying for it and then prioritising, who they're going to pick on a Sunday afternoon for a league game ahead of what they're picking on a Thursday night for this European game. I always remember Bolton Wanderers a good few years ago now, reaching the quarterfinals, I think it was, and putting out a weakened side because they prioritised the game that was coming up at the weekend. And, just little instances like that just, it would never have happened in the era of the Cup Winners' Cup.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. The Europa League is really seen as the unwanted sibling nearly. Teams kind of think of it as a mere kind of afterthought for the most part, apart from obviously Sevilla win it so many times in recent years. But the cover of the book is I found it quite interesting. It features the 1981 final between Dynamo Tbilisi and Carl Zeiss Jena. I'm sure I've pronounced that wrong. Why did you decide to go with that cover?
1980-81 is my first full season of football consciousness. I always knew of football. It was always in our house. I was the youngest of 3. My dad adores football. Older brother who that you just chase after and want to do what they're doing. So football was always part of the furniture at our house. But I'd probably say I can always pinpoint the point of genesis as in sitting there and watching it because you want to watch it rather than it's what we're all watching. Suddenly it's something, hang on a minute, and that looks interesting. And it was Liverpool played Norwich City away, February 1980, first division games on Match of the Day. And it was Justin Fashionu's wonderful goal of the season. A lot of people will know this goal. And it was a day when Liverpool won 5-3. It was a mad game. David Fairclough, bright red like I had at the time. So I could feel this kind of like, I have some relation to this game now. He is a player that looks like a grown-up version of me scoring this hat-trick. And there's Justin Fashanu scoring a wonderful goal. So on the same day, my passionate support of Liverpool, but love of the wider game as a football fan in general was pretty much launched. And then, so by the time you get to the following season, 1980-81, it's the first season that you kind of, eager for the season to start. You get the Panini album, you recognise what league tables mean.
Yeah. And
suddenly there's this switch on moment, and 80-81, the Cup Winners' Cup, just had so many incredible stories to it. I always remember Dynamo Tbilisi tearing West Ham apart in the quarterfinals at Upton Park. It was an incredible performance. And I knew of this team, and they did knock Liverpool out of the European Cup the previous season. And it was a mad season in the Cup Winners' Cup that year. Castilla, Real Madrid's reserve side, took part because they'd reached the Copa del Rey final the previous season, ended up playing the mothership in the final, got beat 6-0, but as it is, Real Madrid won the title as well. So, traditionally what would happen is if a team did the double, then whoever lost the cup final would take that place in the Cup Winners' Cup the following season. So you've got Castilla in the Newport County gained entry by winning the Welsh Cup, which was a wonderful quirk at the time as well. This is a third division side at the time. For much of the season, struggling against a potential relegation to the fourth division, but they go all the way to the quarterfinals and against Carzi Siena, and they get a 2-2 draw away and end up losing the home. They were that close to a semi-final place in 81. So it just had all these wonderful stories to it. And that Dean Motorbellisi side was the stereotypical, what they used to be called was referred to in commentaries were David Coleman, Barry Davis and people like that. They would always refer to them as these crack Eastern European outfits. And that was always the phrase. They always seemed to play in all white. They played the football on the ground, no percentage play, no putting it in the air, short passes, very, very fast. And they were wonderful to watch. And they were just something that, stand out for me as being a kid. And it always meant a late night up on a Wednesday, watching it on sports night, on a school night. And it was just a huge bonus. And these teams just stuck in the mind, so many of these, but none more quite as that Dean Motorbellisi side. And the final they played against Carzi Siena was a wonderful, wonderful game. And it was played at the Rhine Stadium in Dusseldorf, big cavernous stadium, huge iconic electronic scoreboard. And it was only about 4.5, anything between 4.5 and 8,000, depending on what you want to take as your gospel of being the attendance. Not the lowest, but one of the lowest attended European finals of all time in non-pandemic terms. But it was a wonderful game of football. It was these two Eastern Europeans playing on the western side of Europe, so they can't get their own fans there, and there's certainly not many. So it's essentially a few locals who trip along, that decide to go to watch it. But it's just a great game of football, and the winning goal scored by Vitaly Daraselia has striking overtones to a goal that scored the following night at Wembley, which was Ricky Villa's winner in the 81 FA Cup FA Cup final replay. Find it, go look it up. Just look up Vitaly Daraselia 1981 Cup Winners' Cup final. It's a wonderful, wonderful goal, and this team just stuck in the mind. But then over a period of time, they just eroded and vanished for a myriad of reasons. But they always stuck in my mind as being the Cup Winners' Cup. So that word association thing, you can throw out the name of a football player and immediately think of there'll be a goal that will spring to mind. Say the Cup Winners' Cup to me, it was always Dean Motorbellisi, and there couldn't have been anyone else on the front cover for me.
It's amazing. Yeah, I think my own kind of memories were a similar kind of situation to yourself of one of the first kind of European cup finals that I remember is Juventus winning against Ajax 95, and that again sticks in my mind. Kind of what we were discussing about Italy earlier on, and I think as the title, I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head. The randomness of it. You mentioned Castilla, Real Madrid's reserve team playing in a European tournament is insane. It's absolutely off the wall. And even like some of the other things you mentioned, 4,000 people at a European club tournament final again is just off the wall. I suppose looking beyond the quirks, Barcelona were the most successful team in the Cup Winners' Cup. Why do you think they were so good at winning it?
Partially because the velocity of the times they were in the cup tournament. People who are kind of like contemporary football watchers that might not necessarily look back through the history of the game, would be quite surprised at the club that Barcelona were. They always had a high opinion of themselves. They always believed themselves to be the biggest club in the world. Bear in mind that Barcelona never won the European Cup / Champions League until 1992. That was the first time they won it. So they also had a sticking point domestically, partially at their own fault, but part of that as well over the years will have been the sleight of hand of teams being favoured from the capital under the Franco regime. Barcelona have played on this massively over the years of just how significant it was, and we'll never know exactly how significant it was. There were some instances of games looking awry, over those years, but at the same time, their own inconsistencies held them back from winning the title, which means that the European Cup was out of reach because you had to win your league title to gain entry to it.
Yeah.
But they became a very adept cup winning side, so they did end up in the Cup Winners' Cup more often than most clubs. So this is where they came from. They were in it quite often, and when they were in it to win it, and they just seemed quite, very adept at it. Even towards the tail end under Bobby Robson, Ronaldo and Luis Figo in that '97 final against PSG. And they also lost 2 finals as well, 6 times finalists and 4 times winners. Crazy. Twice as many as anyone else managed over those years. But this tournament came within that. I don't know, that it's hard to call it a sweet spot, but that era in which they struggled to win league titles between 1959-60 when they won La Liga and 1984-85 when Terry Venables won it for them. They only won the Liga 1 time between those 2 polar opposites, a quarter of a century, and that's. I say if you tell that to someone who's 18 now, seeing the Barcelona, or even in the 20s, who've sat there and watched the full career of Lionel Messi, this Barcelona is unrecognisable to the Barcelona of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. But the Cup Winners' Cup was right up their street, and they just seemed to take to it like a duck to water.
Incredible. It is incredible to kind of think how successful they have become from some very lean years. And just looking at some of the comments coming in, we have a question here from Conor McManus. He's asking, how big was the Dynamo Dresden Bayern Erdingen 1986 Cup Winners' Cup quarterfinal politically and socially in Germany? Do you have any thoughts on that, Stephen?
Yeah, the absolutely massive games. Any East versus West game was huge. The political cloud that would hang over them. I mean, going back to a European Cup clash between Magdeburg and Bayern Munich, I think 74-75, and the Stasi put in recording equipment in the Bayern dressing room. And then the Magdeburg coach refusing to listen in to what was being said because he was a football man, and within that, he ended up getting the sack because of that and being kind of ostracized from football. So, this was a very, very real thing, so yes, those games, Erdingen and Dresden were absolutely massive, and especially anything to do with Dynamo Berlin. They were the state side. They were the state team, and if anything could be uprooted for anyone in East Germany, if all the chairs were moved by the security tap, then it was for them.
Incredible. Some of the kind of anecdotes and the stories from the book and your own viewpoint is just amazing, and it is so, as the book says, frozen in time. And I suppose, what surprised you most when you were actually coming to research and writing the book? What really kind of made you go, wow, like that? Outside of the anecdotes you've kind of and the stories you've told us already, was there anything else that really kind of made you go, wow, this is what made this tournament what it was, or anything like that?
I think the success of the Eastern European clubs was such a big influence on me writing the book. Slovan Bratislava winning in 1969, the only Czechoslovak side ever to win a European competition. They beat Barcelona in the final. That was a huge thing in a year in which, albeit the Czech capital Prague rather than in Bratislava was invaded by the Soviets and the mates. It was a huge political moment. It was a huge thing, and there were so many other clubs that did so well. Dynamo Kiev, winning under Lobanovsky in 75, and then again in 86 were absolutely massive. And then that especially that 80s side had such an imprint on me. Of all the international teams out there, my two favourites are Lobanovsky's mid to late 80s Soviet Union and Sepp Piontek's Denmark. You get me off started on them, and that'll be it. I'll be off all day on those two. So yes, that 86 side with Belanov in it, who won the Ballon d'Or that year as well, and some of the names are just iconic to me. The likes of Vasily Rats and all of them, can still trip them all off the tongue. So yes, I think the Eastern, and I knew so much about them already, but then you learn more, and then it stretched further. And MTK Budapest run to the final in '64 was an interesting one, and a massive comeback against Celtic. But Celtic had their day a few years later by winning the European Cup as compensation. Yeah. But then, like the final, they played, against Sporting of Lisbon. It ended 3-3 in an incredible final that again was witnessed by a sparsely populated attendance. But then it went to a replay because days before penalties, and it was a 1-0 victory for Sporting that was eked out by a goal scored directly from a corner. It's stuff like this, but it's stuff that you forget as well. I remember Lokomotiv Leipzig's run to the final in '87, for instance, but I'd entirely completely forgotten that when the semi-final against Bordeaux went to a penalty shootout, it was the goalkeeper that scored the decisive penalty and to take them to the final. So it's all, and that was in front of about 120,000 at the Zentral Stadion as well. So it's that juxtaposition of saying, well, look, there's an East German side in the 1981 final, where supporters can't get to it over the wall in Germany, West Germany. But then in their own backyard, just kind of like 6 years later, there's 120,000 watching the second leg, the semi-final in Leipzig. All of these stories, just it was a case of kind of like being reminded of the stuff that I'd forgotten, or as going further back, back to the 70s and the 80s and the 60s is stuff that I never quite knew about. And interesting stuff like 1860 Munich under Max Merkel when they got to the final against West Ham, and then you come to watch the game and you're reading the reports on it, and it's stuff like the way that kind of like West Ham's football was quite expansive under Ron Greenwood. They had a passing game, whereas Merkel's game with 1860 Munich was of a traditional British base, hit the big target man. So there was a role reversal in that West Ham were playing like the continental team, but then there's 1860 who are playing like an Anglo-Saxon, British team of stereotype almost.
Incredible. The kind of political kind of dynamics for when the tournament was going on. As you said, behind the Iron Curtain, these teams you didn't know of, and suddenly they burst into life and they're hammering West Ham. It's just an incredible moment in time. And I suppose the last version or the last kind of edition of the tournament was in 1999. Why did UEFA actually get rid of it in the end?
The Champions League just changed everything. It absolutely changed everything. From the end of the 96-97 season, teams were able to qualify for the Champions League by not even winning the league. From a UK perspective, that meant Newcastle United were able to go into the 1997-98 Champions League. It was a team that hadn't won the English top flight since before the Second World War. That jarred to start, enough as it was. But then what they did within that was they made the concept of being a league runner-up a bigger achievement than winning a domestic cup, because you win your domestic cup, you will go into a tournament that was seen lesser on the food chain than what you will get to by finishing runner-up in your league. And then eventually they very quickly escalated that to teams that were finishing in third and fourth place. You had the absolute farce of the KNVB Cup final being played in 1998 by Ajax and PSV, both who'd finished first and second in the Eredivisie. So they'd already got their Champions League places. neither of those were going to take up the place in the Cup Winners' Cup. It meant that the two beaten semi-finalists had a playoff to see who would take up that place. So within that, those not just the Cup Winners' Cup, but the UEFA Cup as well would become something of, a very defined afterthought, which would continue after the Cup Winners' Cup was absorbed within the UEFA Cup. Was the concept that you would, teams that lost, the final qualifier for a Champions League place were allowed a second bite of the cherry in the UEFA Cup. Teams that finished third in the group stages dropped into the UEFA Cup, and it just made it as if it was some kind of consolation prize rather than what they had once been, and they were very special tournaments. Prior to this sea change, this changing of the landscape, redrawing of the lines of division.
I definitely, I'm lucky enough to remember the Cup Winners' Cup and those three kind of European tournaments, club tournaments, and I really do feel that a generation of football fans missed out on what was actually a really good tournament with a really great concept. And kind of with that in mind, we now have a new tournament coming into European club football starting from next season, the European Conference League. And it's launching next season until 2024. It's going to be 32 teams, 3 qualifying rounds, then a group stage, 8 groups of 4 teams. And in terms of some of the countries, Spain, England, Germany, Italy, France, all the big dogs will get 1 team. And then the so-called lesser leagues, Scotland, Portugal, Netherlands, Russia, and Belgium will get 2. And fixtures will take place on Thursdays, along with Europa League games. What do you think of this concept? Do you think it's a viable tournament moving forward?
Initial reaction was a roll of the eyes. It's just another money-making scheme. But then, in given time, I think it's I don't know, maybe started to not nag at me, but made me think that it might be an interesting tournament. Once it's up and running, if we're talking about, I can't on one hand lament the loss of kind of like some of these evocative names of the past from being at the business end of major European tournaments, and then frown at a tournament that is at least in spirit designed to give them a platform again. I think once the games are up and running, I think it will potentially be much more interesting. The only thing that I think that bothers me mostly is the fact that it's homogenized to be into group stages and to make it look like the Champions League and the Europa League. I think that in an era when we need change in the Champions League, just to make another tournament that mimics the Champions League doesn't make sense to me. I understand in a way that, if they were to run the tournament as they used to be and just say, look, it's 2-legged knockout all the way through to the final, maybe even have a 2-legged final like they used to have in the UEFA Cup final way back, which, again, gives it a different slant. I think UEFA's worry would be the fact that it would become more popular to viewers than the Champions League and Europa League were, because I know as a supporter of a team that takes part in the Champions League on a regular basis, I don't have that interest in watching other group games. I watch my own group games, and then that lack of a knife edge in football is a huge thing. And one of the biggest issues with the Conference League is the fact that some third place teams will still have the chance to go through. It's almost like you're making it very difficult to get knocked out of Europe. There's so many second chances. There's too many second chances.
I think that's one of my biggest problems, even with the Europa League. A lot of the bigger teams now, obviously, with Man United winning it recently, they get dumped out of either the Champions League and go into the Europa League, or they don't qualify and they go directly into them.
It's that second chance. So for me, it shouldn't be a case. Once you're out, and just get on with your domestic football and have another go next year. It's the way it used to be.
Yeah, and I think I like the concept of more teams having a chance to potentially win a European tournament. I think that's a good thing. I think with the 2 teams qualifying from Scotland, Portugal, the other leagues that mentioned that's great. But I would be very much of the mind of yourself that really realistically, we could get the same teams winning this tournament season on season, which again doesn't really solve the problem.
Your Champions League and your Europa League have gone down that route. I was totaling up for an article I was writing not so long ago, and I think since the turn of the millennium, the last 22 Champions Leagues that have been handed out, as will be by the end of this season, 10 of them have been won by Spanish teams. If Villarreal beat Manchester United in this year's Europa League final, it'll be the 11th Spanish success in the tournament since 2000. Football now is too predictable. You can already kind of from the start of a season narrow it down to a small cluster of teams that are likely to be the winners.
Yeah, I think so. I think we've definitely lost something, and that's something that the Cup Winners' Cup. There was never a team that actually won it consecutively. It's crazy.
Yeah, no, the Cup Winners' Cup never had anything like that. No holders won it, and it was just anyone's. Anyone's that put a compelling run together.
Absolutely fantastic, kind of a blast from the past. I think in terms of the Conference League as well. It's going to be broadcast by BT in the UK. There's no prize money announced. The Europa League gives out roughly to the winners 7.5 million. So again, it's not going to, probably it'll be in that ballpark of that money for the winners. As well, I suppose, looking at what it could be, and one thing that kind of struck me instantly when I heard about this, talking about the Cup Winners' Cup, previously, when we had the 3 tournaments with the Cup Winners' Cup, the UEFA Cup was on Tuesday, European Cup was on Wednesday, and then the Cup Winners' Cup was on Thursday. This tournament will be directly in competition with the Europa League, which again, for me, devalues that tournament, which is already devalued. And fair enough, fans will tune into the team that they support. It's not really... What do you think of it going head-to-head on the same day? Is that a wise thing?
It jars, just again, it's that extra football for extra football's sake. In international terms, you look at the Nations League, and you have to ask the question why. First and foremost, not why. Is this the case? Football. I don't know. It needs greater balance. The football calendar. And I think the way that they're doing it is just by throwing, more competitions on the board, and eventually there's a breaking point there. The cynic in me says that the Conference League is basically thrown in there to be to run parallel with the Europa League and the eventuality of the Champions League becoming a European Super League. So you will have your European Super League and 2 competitions below that. And there's not much I've seen or heard that makes me think any different that would be the case.
Yeah, I'd be probably of a similar mind. Even the one thing that actually jars with me as well, and this is a minor point, but even the name, the Conference League, when I think of that name, I think of the Conference League in England, obviously. And it kind of the whole branding, everything around this, playing it on the same night as the Europa League, just kind of really jars with myself as well. And I suppose one final question for yourself before we kind of end this discussion. Do you think maybe in 20 years you might be writing a book about the European Conference League?
No, I doubt it very, very much. I think my writing, I've managed to, I don't know, you channel kind of like your most impressionable era. That's the way I do it. A lot of my writing is from when I was carefree and watching football. And I think most of us would probably say that, you think of your favourite World Cup, it's going to be the first one that you seriously sat and watched, and then judge all others by that. And that's what I, will always judge contemporary modern day football compared to how it felt when I was a kid. And I'll not be writing any books about Europa Leagues and Conference Leagues anytime soon, 20, 30 or 40 years from now, even if I'm still around by then.
Yeah, I definitely feel the same. I have my certain kind of golden generation of football, and I don't think you can touch that.
You do. It's just when you're impressionable, it's the football you grow up with is how you rate the rest of it, and it'll always have an unfair comparison. It's the way that every World Cup after the first one you watch is that little less satisfying. you know, and then you grow up and you have jobs and stuff like that, and it becomes even less of a thing, because what you end up doing is you get to a point where you don't absorb as much of it. So I find it harder to remember stuff about games that happened, you know, recently than I did from 30 years ago when I was a kid, because you have remembered and absorbed so much back then that, you know, in a way that you don't anymore.
Yeah, I definitely agree. That's my own experience as well. I remember the 90s like yesterday. I remember who won the tournaments, everything. It's really interesting how the mind works when it comes to the game.
It is.
But,
it is.
Stephen, it's been absolutely fabulous talking to you. It's been so interesting. And for anyone on the lookout for some good kind of football books, I highly recommend Stephen's book on the Cup Winners' Cup called Tournament Frozen in Time. And he also actually wrote a book, which we unfortunately couldn't discuss today, but hopefully at a later date we'll be able to discuss, where the cool kids hung out regarding the UEFA Cup. They're both published by Pitch Publishing. I also encourage you to give him a follow on Twitter. His username is Scraggy_74. I absolutely love the username as well. It's absolutely fantastic. Stephen, thanks so much today. It's been such a great conversation. And I'm sure we'll speak at some stage in the future.
Oh, certainly will. Thanks for having me on, David.
No worries. And